Pascal Lamy has issued a warning to the EU over the impact of Mr. Trump's trade war. Image, Getty. If the US were to step further in not only hitting China with trade measures but with sanctions, if they were to deal with China the way they did with Iran, then we would all have a big problem. World Trade Organization, WTO, Director General Pascal Lamy Mr Lamy urged the bloc to prepare for its companies to be targeted by American sanctions, with the ongoing dispute between the two superpowers showing no sign of resolution, as they weigh up a response to renewed U.S. sanctions against Iran, which have forced an exodus of European companies from the Middle Eastern country. EU governments should consider the prospect of similar extraterritorial measures penalizing China trade, Mr. Lamy told an international investment conference in Paris. He said, if the U.S. were to step further in not only hitting China with trade measures but with sanctions, if they were to deal with China the way they did with Iran, then we would all have a big problem. That's why we need to have a careful look at what will happen in the case of Iran. A surge in global protectionism from Brexit to the U.S.-China trade war has done little to dent foreign direct investment flows overall, according to data presented to the XBMA conference on cross-border mergers and acquisitions. The global volume of M. This is its second highest annual total since 2007, the eve of the last major financial crisis. Chinese investors accounted for a record 20% of European inbound deal volume last year as some turned their attention away from the United States. Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Trump pictured in Hamburg during the G20 summit. Image, Getty. Europe-China trade is also expected to benefit from increased U.S.-China tariffs or other barriers. The Trump administration in May withdrew Washington from an international agreement to curb Tehran's nuclear activities, and imposed new sanctions against Iran. That triggered the mass withdrawal of European companies from carmakers to oil majors, in order to avoid crippling U.S. penalties reintroduced in stages on August 6 and November 4. European governments have pledged in response to establish new financing channels which shield companies from U.S. sanctions, but a viable program has yet to emerge. Mr. Lamy's report was co-authored by Louis Schweitzer. Image, Getty. Although the White House declared a truce with Brussels in late July, European companies have been caught in the crossfire of the U.S. tariff row with China. The EU Chamber of Commerce in Beijing last month said its members were becoming increasingly frustrated at the lack of clear information from officials amid the growing trade war between the U.S. and China. The comments by Mr. Lamy, who served as EU Trade Commissioner before heading the WTO, expanded on recommendations published in a policy paper last week by the Jacques Delors Institute, a European think tank. Europe could create its own extraterritorial mechanisms to sanction breaches of environmental, data protection, tax and anti-corruption laws, according to the paper co-authored by Mr. Lamy and 4 others including Louis Schweitzer, honorary chairman of carmaker Renault. Failing that, it said Brussels could use existing directives to halt the EU activities of foreign banks from a third country that imposes extraterritorial provisions on EU companies. The paper added, it cannot be ruled out that the United States will impose future sanctions on China that go beyond the current trade measures initiated by the American president, which could then be applied extraterritorially. Perhaps it would be wise to take decisions for the Iranian case by considering this wider economic and political context. The U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on the import of steel from the EU, Canada and Mexico on June 1. China responded firmly and accused the country of starting the largest trade war in economic history to date. They also claimed the move was a violation of WTO rules.